The familiar chime rang out, reverberating off the cement block walls as the elevator door slid open. In the months we'd been living in the building, we'd only rarely shared the elevator with anyone else, but this time, there was a woman on the lift already. She didn't acknowledge our presence as we got on the elevator with her. She just stood there in the back corner, expressionless. I reached in front of her to press the button to take us down to the ground floor. The buttons for the 5th and 6th floors were illuminated, as though they had already been pressed, as was the button for the basement. The door slid closed, and the elevator cables began to creak and groan as they pulled us upward. The elevator stopped on the 5th floor, and with the chime, the silence filling the space was broken, and the doors opened. There was no one waiting to get on, and the woman in the corner made no move to exit the elevator. I looked over my shoulder at Matt. We shared a look of confusion, but didn't think much of it. Perhaps the woman had accidentally pressed the button for both floors. That would be a simple mistake. After a moment, the doors closed again, and we were hoisted the rest of the way up to the 6th floor. Another chime and the door slid open. Again, there was no one there. Again, the woman made no move to exit. Nervous laughter escaped me as I glanced over at the woman. She remained expressionless. Her eyes were almost lifeless. She looked dull. There was no luster to her hair or skin. She was elderly and wore a long winter coat, a fur hat and boots. Clean and fashionable, but kind of dated. She hadn't moved an inch since we stepped into the elevator 2 floors ago. She didn't shift her weight from one side to the other. She didn't adjust her grip on the bag she was carrying. She didn't make a sound. A sense of dread washed over me. I didn't want to spend another second on the lift with this strange woman. I wanted to exit the elevator right there on the 6th floor and take the stairs down. I looked at Matt and I could tell he was on the same page. But before we could make our move, the doors closed again. The elevator began its descent, the cables creaking as we were lowered toward the ground. The display above the elevator doors flashed the numbers for each floor as we passed them. 5, 4, 3, 2. As we finally reached the ground floor, the elevator shuddered as it came to a stop. There was a long pause before the familiar chime finally rang out and the door slid open. We got off the elevator as fast as we could, not taking the time to look back at the woman in the corner. She did not exit the elevator with us. We can only assume she took the lift the rest of the way down to the basement. We hurried out of the building and across the parking lot to the car. We sat there in the car for a while, watching the doors for the woman to leave the building, but she didn't. We had never seen her before that day, and we have never seen her since. I was 14. My mom and I lived in a typical council estate flat in West London. It was Saturday morning at around 2:30 a.m., and we were about to go to bed after a night of watching television. My mom turned off the television, important to remember later, and went into her bedroom to put something away. I was lying on the sofa with my kitten Katie, but I was wide awake. I sat up to get ready to get in my wheelchair to go to bed. Suddenly, it was like static in the air, but there was no noise, nothing but silence. At this point, I was totally alone in the living room as Katie had wandered out to the hall. I just happened to glance at the television and saw it was glowing with this beautiful white light. In the center of the television, a really ancient-looking old woman was staring directly at me. Her face ran with lines, her hair was long and straight, and her eyes were filled with so much goodness and wisdom. It was as if she saw right into my soul, and I was bathed with a strong kind of tranquility and calmness I hadn't felt before. This is not to say that I wasn't surprised by the event. I called out to my mom twice. Then, as suddenly as she came, the beautiful pure light disappeared along with the ancient wise woman. There was static once more, and the screen was black again. My mom came out of her room a few seconds later and said she hadn't heard me. My mom has always been slightly skeptical when it comes to the unexplained, but our family has had its fair share of weird things, so it didn't really faze or surprise her too much. Through all of this, I didn't once feel threatened or menaced by the vision of this wise woman, and have always remembered her with curiosity and interest. In fact, I have sometimes wished she would come visit me again. A year ago, my girlfriend invited me to move in with her full time. I stayed over before for a weekend. Nothing seemed off about the place or the living arrangement. I didn't get goose pimples or a sense of dread when I roamed around the place. Shortly after her invitation, I chose to move in with her. She was rather insistent that I move in immediately. I decided just to pull up the stakes and find a job in the area after I moved in. This meant I spent most of my day alone in the house. It took a lot longer than I thought it would to get an entry-level job in the area. After a while, I took to laying in bed for an hour or two out of the day. That's when I started to notice strange noises. They sounded like radio commercials and music, though I could never quite make out what was said. The voices had the tones of males and females, but all I could hear was garbled nonsense. Just recall radio commercials for local businesses, interspersed with semi-discordant music, and you're probably close to the mark. A little while after that, I started having vivid, jarring dreams. In one, I was holding an infant, and then I had a seizure and started squeezing the baby. I couldn't let go, and it had a horrified look on its face. That woke me up, and once I could go back to sleep, I was hit with another. The next one came as soon as I went back to sleep. I was standing in the backyard. Then I heard young children's panic screaming. I ran inside, just to see a toddler-aged child running out the front door with an infant slung over their shoulder. I got to the toddler and infant in the driveway where the toddler dropped the baby. The baby started vomiting a large amount of green fluid. Immediately upon waking, I clearly heard, "Every smart homeowner knows," and it faded away. We didn't have a radio or a television on. It seemed like the same kind of commercial mimicry, but with more clarity. On another night, I woke up to a hard slap on the side of my head. I saw my girlfriend standing over me with tears running down her cheeks. She disappeared when I yelled, "Why the hell did you hit me?" To which my girlfriend, laying next to me all along, sleepily stated, "I didn't hit you. What are you talking about?" A couple of weeks after that, my girlfriend went to bed earlier than I. I was on my computer in the finished basement, almost directly under the bedroom. After a few hours, she messaged me and asked me to come upstairs. She said it sounded like there was a block party outside, and she heard people talking outside the window. If there had been anything like that, I would have heard it as well. I heard nothing of the sort, whilst in pretty much the same side of the house. The neighborhood had been quiet all night, for me at least. We resolved to move the bed, just in case we were picking up radio broadcasts or some other odd signal. She had heard the same things as well before I moved in. The adjustment seemed to significantly cut down on the odd commercial noises, though I noticed them for a couple of seconds, especially when tensions between her and I were elevated. Over the coming months, there was a host of other small odd occurrences. After the basement became unnaturally cold, I began to feel like I wasn't alone. I would catch brief glimpses of a naked man facing away from me in the basement. I had a general feeling I wasn't welcome. The worst instance happened when I was in the middle of remodeling the basement half bathroom. I went from sweating to practically freezing in an instant. I felt like something was standing just behind me and off to the side, with about as much directed menace as I'd ever felt. I'm not religious, but I started naming as many saints as I could remember while I finished my process. Then I got the hell out of there, and I decided I would stream some games from the basement PC to the upstairs television while my girlfriend slept in. I started having all kinds of bandwidth problems, then somehow I was signed out of my account. To my knowledge, that needs to be done manually. Shortly after that, she woke up from a bad dream. She was with her mother, and they came back to her mother's house to find the door ajar. They found that her cats had been messily slaughtered and fed to dogs with various anti-Semitic epithets spray painted on them. All throughout this time, our relationship deteriorated. She would become physically violent at times, all I could do was block her and attempt to restrain her. This eventually became emotionally abusive as well. The shark-like look of pure hate in her eyes was the most disturbing. Like the woman that I knew just wasn't there. I kept waking up in the middle of the night, flailing. I felt under attack. One night, I bashed my hand on the nightstand. Another night, I woke up outside, fully clothed. She said I had been acting like a lunatic. It all became too much for me, and I moved out. I worry about her, so we still keep in contact. Yet another strange thing happened last night. We were talking on the phone, but I eventually became too tired and fell asleep. She stayed on the line because listening to me sleep helps calm her. When I woke up, we were disconnected. I checked my messages and she wanted me to call her back. I blurrily called her back and started to go back to sleep. I heard a faint voice on the line, which I brushed off as some podcast on her tablet, until she started responding to me. I perked up a bit and heard a voice that sounded like mine, though I couldn't make out what was being said. I asked her who she was talking to, which confused her. She thought she was talking to me. I asked her what the voice had said to her, and she said it sounded like me asking her if she was okay, if she had found a job yet. I told her that I had said nothing, though I had heard something that sounded like me as well. Naturally, this unsettled her, as we both know something is wrong in the house. I don't know if there's something in the house itself, or if it can be tied to a certain relic she has. It's a chakwe, a tribe from Angola, mask, which symbolizes a mother being separated from her child as he enters manhood. I've urged her to donate it to some curator, as there are several in the area. The tribe itself is known to use their crafts as commodities, so I can't be certain about that angle, although I know something in that house is disruptive, and loves to do it. I nightmared for an unknown amount of time. Dreams you remember always seem to last all night. About a man looking through my windows at night and stalking the property. I was scared the whole dream, but ripped my door open and confronted them on the lawn. The man retreated, trying to explain, before transforming into a handicapped woman. I was still mad and afraid about the lurking, but then tried to be understanding of the lurker. Kind of a befriend them so they won't kill you sort of mindset, before waking in the morning. It was still dark, and being completely paralyzed physically, though I was awake with all my mental faculties, or so I thought. I saw someone in the doorway to my bedroom, and remembering my dream of the lurker, I was extremely afraid. I heard myself making some gurgling sounds, trying to scream for my boyfriend in the next room, but I couldn't. I even tried to flop my useless hand to my mouth to pry it open to scream. Once I realized I was powerless, I looked back at the doorway and saw that the bedroom door was closed, and likely had been all night. There was no way I'd seen someone standing within it. I was so tired from the experience and in general that I fell back asleep until my alarm. I woke up to my alarm and over coffee told my boyfriend of the dream in the episode. He went big-eyed, saying he had had nearly the same dream that night, minus the sleep terror, except he heard dirt crunching as if there were footsteps on the rocks in his dream. Now, consider that the lane behind our house has no out, and is laid with all quartz gravel. This is a little bit difficult to talk about, as it happened last Thursday night, and is still very emotional. A little backstory. I've always been in touch with the other side. They use me a lot. Typically, I have no emotional connection with any spirit I come in contact with. This was different. An important piece of information is that I have a 6-year-old daughter. When I go outside, oftentimes she will be directly on the other side of the front door and asking when I'll be back in. In the early afternoon, my wife and I had stepped outside for a few minutes. As usual, I heard a little girl on the other side of the door. Not so usual, this little girl said mama. My daughter always calls me mommy or mom. I answered, yes dear, just as I always would, but there was no response from the other side of the door. I realized that my daughter was playing in her room the whole time. Later that night, my wife and I were laying in bed scrolling Reddit, and my 6-year-old had only just fallen asleep. I heard what sounded like her getting out of bed. I waited for her to come to the door, but she never showed. I got up to check on her, and she was still very much asleep. I crawled back into bed, and after a few moments I heard it again. We have cats, so hearing noises at night isn't out of the ordinary. I thought nothing of it. Whenever my 6-year-old is standing in my doorway, I can feel it. Awake or asleep, I feel it. Well, I had that same feeling after hearing the noise again. I turned around expecting to see my dark-haired, green-eyed daughter. Only the child I saw was so blonde, her hair was almost white, and her eyes were golden brown. I looked away for a split second at my wife, and the child was gone. About 30 seconds later, I heard that same voice that said "Mama" just a few hours earlier. My wife didn't see her or hear her, but she very clearly heard it the first time. The age of this child is what mine would have been had I not miscarried. The father is blonde with golden eyes. She had curls in his chubby cheeks. I could just feel that she was my baby. I think she came to me because I needed something to keep me going.